Hey friends, welcome back to Thrive Online Healing Podcast. This is episode 51, and we are talking about processed foods. We're going to define what they are and get super clear.
Yes, I think sometimes maybe it gets a little bit confusing because I feel like I talk about, trying to avoid processed foods a lot of times and thinking that people already know what that means. And then people will stop and ask and say, well, wait, what do you mean? Because technically a lot of food is processed
Yes.
if you don't grow it in your garden. And so we're going to try to make things a little bit more clear today.
Yes. Because I think a lot of times the human brain too wants to create confusion when it doesn't want to do something and it has a belief system that we're going against, right? Its go-to defense mechanism tends to be like confusion.
Yes.
Right? And valid justification. So
Mhm.
I see that especially with foods, because when you're talking about like you need to stop eating processed foods, the brain wants to go to, well, I don't drink Dr. Pepper and I don't eat Snickers,
And
right? But then you go through the pantry and it's like, well, yes, this isn't a Snickers, but this still is processed. Just to
right.
be super clear.
Yes. Because I think that, it's you're right, people kind of justify it as a sort of that spectrum, right? Okay, so I'm not doing Snickers and Dr. Pepper, but like this macaroni and cheese is okay, right? Or this microwave popcorn, or you
Yes.
know this I don't yeah, fill in the blank,
Yeah.
um is okay. And just because it's not maybe laden with sugar that we think of, it's still things that our body has to process, right? So the reason why processed foods, usually I tell folks that things that come in a box or a bag, something that's kind of pre-made to a certain extent, right? So like chili out of a can, right? It's pre-made. So you think things like hamburger helpers or macaroni and cheese, like that cheese, you just add water and changes the consistency of it, and now it's food.
Mhm.
um, but those things, you have to think of the level of chemicals, right, that are involved to create those in that processing part. So if it's something that you just add water to and it makes whatever your meal is, it's had some preservatives in it, but it also has some chemicals in it that are not, our body does not register that as food, right? So now that is actually a different load of toxins that your liver and your body is going to have to sift through and figure out what it can incorporate, what nutrients might be in there, and things that is garbage that we've got to eliminate,
Yeah.
right? So your body's having to work more, especially that liver, but also the gallbladder and the intestines, in trying to filter through like what's actually nutritious, like where's the nutritional value in this thing, right? Because you can look at the nutritional label of processed foods, and sometimes they will still say or they may be enriched or fortified with minerals or B vitamins, right? It may say like enriched with vitamin C or vitamin D or niacin or whatever. So those things, your body's like, it's got to sift through all of that to try and find that nutritional value in
Mhm.
those processed foods. So, so when we're talking about that level of processing, there's also, I'm gonna give you a different example. Oats, right? So think of oatmeal. Okay, so there's different levels of processing. So we think of oatmeal as pretty healthy, right? I mean, oatmeal is usually just the dried oats, but there's different variations. So you can find like steel cut oats, right? That is oats that have just been dried, and the husk has been taken off, and then it's cut into pieces, right? So it takes longer to cook steel cut oats. Now they have, somebody told me the other day, they have quick cooking steel cut oats.
Yeah.
Um, To be honest, I don't know what that is. I suspect it's maybe something that's kind of like it's parboiled, like it's halfway cooked, for the convenience of the consumer, but I'm not positive.
Gotcha.
But then, so you take steel cut oats and then they process it one level and then it becomes what we think of as oatmeal, right? So like rolled oats. So they've dried them and flattened them. And then you're still getting some fiber in the rolled oats. Then it goes into quick cook oats, right? And then it goes into maybe quick cook oats are the last ones, where your oatmeal's like you just add hot water to it, or then they put it in the packets with cinnamon sugar, and then instant oatmeal.
Yeah.
So technically, it's all oatmeal, right? But what's in the instant packets is much more processed than steel cut oats.
Yeah.
Or even rolled oats.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when we're trying to identify sort of what those processed foods are, we want the things that are as close to what we can find growing outside, right? Yeah. So even because I like to talk about oatmeal because it's usually high in fiber, but you will find if you start comparing, go to the oatmeal section at the grocery store and start comparing the labels, and you'll see the steel cut oats have more fiber in it than the instant or the quick cook oats. Okay. Like the 1 minute oats or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And so you think, well, it's all oatmeal, but the more processed it is, the less fiber it is, the less nutritional value it is to a certain extent. And then if they package it for convenience in instance, they add other preservatives. They also add a lot of sugar to it to make it tasty for folks. And then that's a lot more chemicals that you're trying to process.
Right.
So
I think that, I mean, here's where my brain goes, right? Yeah. It's this, I think we start with this perfectionist mentality. Okay, you told me not to eat anything that comes in a package, right? Or a box. And so then we try to do that. And for me, it's very hard to maintain that perfectionist, only eating vegetables, fruit, meat.
Sure. Right?
Sure. Like that's just, and so then we quit. And then we find ourselves like incorporating back into processed food. So I think that I don't know, maybe you can argue with me. I feel like there has to be like a red, yellow, and green zone of processed food, right? Because we are busy. I'm not trying to make an excuse, but I do want to acknowledge I cannot just go grow all my food and then just eat it and prep it. And maybe that is excuses. But like a lot of us are busy, right? And like it is nice to have some of those convenience stuff.
Sure. So the reason why I talk to people about processed foods is because I want to, especially like early on, if people have a lot of symptoms, right, that they're experiencing, whether that's due to a known chronic illness or due to something that they don't know or doctors can't diagnose, right? Something like autoimmune conditions or fibromyalgia or arthritis, right? We talk about processed foods because at some point in our diet, we've got to clean the slate a little bit, right? So like if you continuously eat processed foods every day, your body's never going to have that clean slate, right? Yeah. So you're always going to be creating this inflammation, right? Or if somebody's had an injury, that's a good time to do an anti-inflammatory diet that takes out those processed foods. And so it's that constant bombardment of those chemicals and that processed food that creates disease within our body, right? So you're exactly right. If we're limiting our processed foods, right? Because we're busy. Americans are busy. Now you create whatever that looks like in your life, but they do package those things for convenience on purpose. And so the reason we talk about processed foods, I just want to bring it to people's attention so that you're learning to look at those labels, and then you're making those decisions that make sense for you, right? So it's really the amount of processed foods. If you're doing processed foods every day, you're going to feel it in your body, right? And if you're feeling all this, like the aches and pains, and you're feeling like you're, usually people will say, gosh, my body feels older than I feel, right? Or my body's trying to, they'll ask, is this part of getting older? This the headaches, the creakiness, like the stiff joints, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning, right? Like that fatigue, that brain fog. Our brains doesn't feel like it's clicking as fast as it used to, right? So all of those sort of like underlying things that may not be diagnosable, but are inconvenient and bothersome symptoms that people notice. Sometimes by cutting out those processed foods for at least a week or two can help to show you what you're eating, how it's affecting your physical health, right? Does that make sense? So that's why, bringing it to people's attention is important. But you're exactly right. So when we're still doing, eating at a convenience, right? Even processed foods still has a spectrum, right? So like I said, even oatmeal, right? Still cut oats is still processed, but not to the extent that like instant oatmeal is.
Yeah.
Right? So you can do the same thing when you're looking at and comparing different processed foods, things that are in a box or in a bag. The labels, the ingredients, the less ingredients, the better, is always number one. So like, say you're looking in the bread aisle and you're looking at loaves of bread, right? Read all the labels, and the one that has the least amount of ingredients is usually the better one. If it has a whole panel of ingredients of things that you don't recognize or things you can't pronounce, it's not going to be as beneficial for you, right? That processing is on the further like instant oatmeal side, right? Versus you pick a loaf of bread and it's got ingredients that you can read, right? It's got a smaller paragraph of ingredients. That's going to be your better choice. Right? Does that help?
Yeah, because I think it gives people, it takes us out of that black and white thinking that I just have to cut it all out. I can still have these things. I just have to be more intentional, like peanut butter.
Yes.
Right? Like I can still have peanut butter, but I'm just going to have to go read the labels and like look at Jif. Oh, it has a lot more chemicals and a lot more sugar versus the natural. I don't know. I haven't read the ingredients on natural Jif.
Yes.
Like, okay, I can still have it. This isn't all or nothing. I just have to be a little bit more conscientious in the selection of that product and get closer to its original form.
Exactly. And I will tell you that I tell people always read the labels, right? Because we can't trust marketing.
Right.
If it says, because I'm not to pick on Jif because I don't know, but oftentimes the FDA does not regulate natural, right? Natural to us may mean something, but in the marketing world doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Yeah. So it could have the exact same ingredients and just get rebranded. Right. So that's why I ask people to read those ingredients to help them make better choices. Yeah. Because we're all humans, right? And so to ask somebody to stick to something 100%, it can be a little bit challenging, right? I mean, we're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have peaks and troughs, and that's okay. But if you're looking at, if you find yourself kind of slipping down that slippery slope of reaching for processed foods or things that are easy or quick or convenient, and you're starting to feel bad in your body's trying to send you signs and send you those, signals. It's like, hey, this wasn't the best idea, right? Yeah. So we compromise with people, right? And some folks have that personality that, hey, they are hooked up. They want to do 100%. which is great. But sometimes that's not sustainable
Yeah.
long term. Yeah. So even, an 80%, 80, 90%, sometimes I give people 75%, where you're trying to make better choices, trying to do those single ingredient foods.
Mm-hmm.
So my fiance does not like quinoa. He doesn't like it. He'll complain every time I make it. And I really like quinoa.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a couple of blends that are like wild rice or brown rice and quinoa blends. They're in a box. And it has its own seasoning packet to it, right? That I buy at Aldi's, and he'll eat those. And so I'm like, all right, if I can recreate this, then you'll eat, then he'll eat quinoa. And so I had to kind of play around a little bit, but it really is just the seasoning in it, right? Like the chicken broth that I add to it. I add the garlic, I had onions, I add some paprika to it, a little bit of cardamom, and now he loves it. Right. So I don't have to buy it in a box anymore, but I did for a while. I bought several different kinds because I was like, okay, if you'll eat these, but you won't eat what I'm cooking, like I got to bridge that gap there.
Yeah.
And so I use those, right? They're still processed, but I use those to kind of experiment to try and figure out what flavor profile, right? What consistency that he liked.
Mm-hmm.
And so if people are, just transitioning to a more whole foods, less processed diet, sometimes those things are a little bit better, like a blend of wild rice or a blend of Spanish rice has different, a little bit better ingredients than things like hamburger helper, right? Or I don't eat those, but that section in the grocery store.
Yeah.
And so, or like a dried bean mix, right? Versus like, I don't know, something else that's already put together in a can, like a soup that's in a can, a bean soup or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Um, so I think, like, can you help the people? So diabetes just keeps coming up in my life.
yeah.
And I feel like the journey for people that are newly diagnosed with diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, I think it's a very hard transition because they have for decades ate a certain way.
Yes.
And now there's this fear factor, like you're diabetic, you have to make changes. And so it's like, how do you make that transition easier for them? Right? Like it's not this all or nothing. Like I want it to be like, look, just quit eating processed foods.
Yes.
But I also intellectually understand like they're addicted. Processed food is addicting. There's chemicals in it making it addicting. Sugar is addictive. And
Yeah.
so it's like telling someone that, I don't want to make light of like, I don't know, being a meth addict, right? Like I understand that's a very, very difficult journey. But it's like telling someone that's on meth, like, oh, sorry, your liver's dying. You need to quit taking meth cold turkey. It's like I'm setting them up for failure. And I feel like that's what we're kind of doing for these people that are like newly diagnosed with diabetes. Just go to unprocessed food. It's like, but this is how I've ate for 30 years.
Right. When you ask people to make such big changes like that without any support, you're exactly right. They're less likely to be successful. And then it's frustrating, right? It's like, gosh, I tried and it didn't work. Usually, okay, so you touched on a couple of different things that I think is really important. One is that, yes, so processed foods, if you start reading the ingredients, you'll notice that sugar is often within the first three ingredients,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of some form or fashion. So if it doesn't say sugar, it may say corn syrup, it may say maltodextrine, it may say dextrose. A lot of synthetic sugars are in there. And so sugar in itself is addicting. It lights up the same places in our brain that meth does, that heroin, that cocaine does. It wreaks havoc on our dopamine receptors. And then, so yes, we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And then the other chemicals like MSG is usually in a lot of those products. And even though MSG may not be strictly addictive, it plays on our taste buds, right? And our taste buds are sensory organs that go straight to our brain. And so if it tastes good, it's kind of like something feels good, you keep doing it because it feels good, right? Same thing. So that's where, just asking people to do processed foods is not going to cut it. You have to have some type of support system there, right? So, and the other thing with diabetics, or to be honest, anybody with chronic disease, is that oftentimes that's a little bit of a wake-up call for people, because when we're younger, we think, oh gosh, our body's resilient, right? We can eat that bag of potato chips, we can eat that soda, we can go through the drive-through, and we're fine. And sometimes there's this disconnect because some folks haven't been taught, right, either how to cook or what good food tastes like, or not good food, but what like healthy food, is supposed to taste like, because their taste buds have been blunted by the sugar and the MSG that has been, they've been eating all their lives. And then there's also this mentality like that natural, healthy, unprocessed food is expensive, right? So you can go to McDonald's and they have a dollar menu and you can order whatever off the dollar menu, and then like it fills you up. People think they're like, oh, I feel fuller if I eat this than if I eat a salad, right? People will always complain like, oh, a salad doesn't fill me up. And oftentimes they feel fuller because of the gas and the bloating that's associated with that dollar menu item, but that's a side note. So it is a little bit, so it's when people who are newly diagnosed, or even, people who may not have been newly diagnosed, but are at a point where they want to make those diet changes, it is a little bit of a process, right? And the biggest part at the beginning is learning to read labels and checking in with their body, right? Because just knowing that, oh, I shouldn't eat those things, that's not enough, right? Because we can all know that intellectually, but that's not always motivating to do things. So I try to get people to, when they eat something, recognize what it feels like in their body, right? And then for diabetics, check your blood sugar. See what that hamburger does to your blood sugar, right? And then understand, okay, every time that blood sugar spikes, you're causing organ damage, right? So it starts with the small capillaries first, like in our eyes and our hands and our fingers, or our fingers and our toes. So every time you're doing organ damage, you are setting yourself up for that chronic illness, but you're also taking time off of your level of health, right? And taking time off your life, right? So having people understand how they have an active role, right, when they make those decisions of how it affects their health long term. Because we are very much an instant gratification society, right? Like,
yes. Yeah. And I want to side note this, because we think it's all about discipline.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Sorry. And we bag on this like instant gratification, but here's the deal. We're wired that way. There's parts of our brain that we work out of, and that primal part of our brain is seek pleasure. Eat the chocolate, eat the processed foods, right? It feels good. Feels good means survival. And then avoid pain, right? And utilize as minimal energy as possible. So that instant gratification is coming from the primal brain, right? And we have to be able to just recognize that. Like, that's my animal instincts. Yes. That's not like, that's part of the intellectual picture, right? Because I have this prefrontal cortex that I can upload into that delays gratification, that will plan things out and will delay the gratification for goals. So when we're having this instant gratification, I just want people to be aware, like, oh, that's part of my primal brain. That's not like that's not my only option to listen to.
Exactly. Yes. So by helping people see that connection will often help them make those better choices.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. So that's why, seeing those numbers change or noticing physically what's different within their body when they eat those foods can be a good way to help people get out of that, that instant gratification cycle, and this recognizing, oh, okay, let me tap in to a different part of my cortex so that, I can be choosing better health, right? Yeah. Because the trick is with diabetes and blood sugar is that same thing with blood pressure. There's not always a lot of symptoms, right? People don't always notice it until it's already too late.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because our body is very good about trying to maintain what they call homeostasis, right? So you're, bombarding it with processed foods and sugar, and it's doing its best to keep up so that you don't feel bad. And then, it unattended, unaddressed long term, right? That's when we start to see the things like people losing fingers and toes, right? People going blind because of diabetes, people going into kidney failure and having to go to dialysis. It's because it's gotten to a point where our body's not able to maintain and function well with all this constant bombardment, right? Yeah, of inflammation and processed foods. So, yes. Yeah. So there are other things that you could do so kind of bringing it back around to your original or one of the questions about the diabetes is that you got to set up support plans, right? So it's not just about diet with diabetes, but you also have to address the cravings and kind of break that addiction with sugar and with the processed foods and those laden chemicals. But you also have to address the gut as well, because a lot of our cravings do come from the gut as well and those bacteria. So you're trying to change the whole terrain or environment within the body to be more healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But processed foods is a good segue to get that started. But you also talked about discipline. Is that oftentimes it's hard for us. That's part of that 100%, right? Showing up 100%, being disciplined to not eat those processed foods. And in the long term, that's not always, that's not a good place to come from, because then you beat yourself up. You're like, oh, I fell off the wagon, right? Or I slipped off. And that's some of the trouble in working with addictive behavior in the addiction field, right? It's the same mentality. It's the same issues that we see of that can start a cycle of re-addiction because you already feel bad, right? You're beating yourself up. And it's like, oh, well, if I'm not any good, I might as well, partake in whatever addictive behavior somebody has.
Yep. Yeah, I love I love this ideology from my coach, because she started as a weight loss coach. Oh. And she talks about like urges. Like you're gonna have urges. Yeah. They're just emotions. And we just sit with that urge and we feel that urge. And we're so afraid, and we have to like to get rid of the urge, we have to satisfy it usually, instead of just sitting with it and like putting a timer. Like, I'm going to sit with this urge for 10 minutes. And if it's still here, then fine. I will go eat a piece of chocolate. But after 10 minutes and like feeling the urge, and most of the time it just goes away after a minute and a half. Right. So like being able to do that. And then also being like aware of like, what emotion am I feeling right now that's making me want to go eat this cake? Because most of the time we're eating to feel an emotion or to avoid feeling an emotion.
Yes. Because that's part of that. It feels good, right? Oftentimes, especially Americans. I think other countries and other folks don't have this relationship with food that we do, and it's sort of this unhealthy relationship. Is that if we're not feeling an emotion that we like, you're going to reach for food to buffer that emotion, because food makes you feel good for a lot of people. And so we get into this emotional eating cycle that's often that we hear about, like comfort foods, right? If chips and chocolate are your comfort food and you're uncomfortable a lot of the time, you're feeding that that addiction. But yes, I thank you for bringing that up, because that's another, when we're talking about, we've moved a little bit from processed foods, but when we're talking about making choices of our food, just so that that's not automatic, you automatically reach for that candy or chocolate or whatever, right? We're feeling tired, we're upset, we're lonely. But yes, stress, taking that 10 minutes to sit with that urge and feel like, am I really hungry? Yeah. Or is this something else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's part of the whole puzzle, right?
Yes.
In terms of processed food, and like this moving away from, like, we all know, I feel like as Americans, we know that those bag of chips like are not the best choice for us.
Yeah.
And we know we should be eating kale instead of hamburger helper, right?
Yeah.
But then it's the mind battle. I don't like it. It doesn't taste good.
Mm-hmm.
That's more expensive. I'm hungry even after I eat it, right?
Right.
And it's just like, wait. Or like the whole justification, like, well, popcorn's healthy, right?
Yes.
It's not pork rinds. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's because we want what we want because it makes us feel good.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Because we're trying to, when you're looking at, right, like that root cause, you've got to, check in. That's why I have people, when you check in with your body and figure out, and then making that connection in your mind, is this a choice that I want to make, or is this, something that's just kind of automated that I've trained myself, I'm used to making all the time, right? Or my family's used to making, right? Like when you're tired at the end of a long day, right? You're stressed, work was really hard, and you're going home and you're like, oh, I gotta, feed myself, I gotta feed kids. It's so much easier to pull into, I don't, what are these, Burger King or McDonald's or whatever is out here. Taco Bell, because you think, oh, it's quick, they're gonna do it for me, I can eat it, and then that's one less stress on me. I don't have to stress about eating.
Yeah.
I mean, cooking dinner, because I had such a hard day at work.
Yes. I mean, I get it. I
Yeah.
I don't like doing it either, right? Like, and I don't cook dinner in the evening. I wait till my husband gets home to cook dinner, right? But I get it. But then that just takes, like, okay, then we have to figure out something that works for us.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Like either meal prepping and just having a bunch of it already made for the week, or I invest in, I don't know, those like Blue Apron.
Oh yeah.
It's like this healthier food that's already got the menu, all the ingredients, and they send it to you. And people be like, well, that's expensive. Well, eating at McDonald's and Brahms and all this every night and lunch is going to be more expensive than those like Blue Apron.
Yes.
Right? You just got to meet yourself where you are. And I'm like, cooking. Okay, well, then I'm going to spend one day and I'm going to cook 2 meals.
Right.
Yes,
that's part of that being prepared, right? Yeah. Because a lot of people will think, that the fast food is quicker, right? It's quicker, it's cheaper. In the long run, it's not cheaper, right? I mean, diabetes is not a cheap diagnosis. Cardiovascular disease is not a cheap diagnosis. Cancer is not cheap in the long run. So you're thinking, okay, you've got to, if you've got medicine that you have to do, if you've got doctor's visits, if you end up in the hospital, insurance is expensive, or those co-pays are expensive. So it's not cheaper. It's more expensive on the back end, I guess. Yeah. And so it's that instant gratification again, right? Like, oh, this whole meal was only $5. I'm winning. It's like, well, are you really?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. So, being prepared is especially around food, is always easier. Right. Yeah. So I usually have people consider, well, when they go to a grocery store, go with a list. And I do have lists that I give people, right? So like they have an idea of, what to look for, because it can be overwhelming when you're trying to transition into less processed foods. And so you kind of explore. It takes a little bit of an exploration period to find out what you like, right? You can go online and you can ask companies for samples nowadays. Yeah. So you can always go to their website and may say, contact us and say, hey, I'd like a sample of your chips, or I'd like a sample of your cereal, or whatever. And they will totally send it to you. So if you're tight on budget, you don't have to try a bunch of things you're not going to like.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that's really important, because people get a little bit overwhelmed with that as well. But then, what was I saying? So then, finding what works. So whether that's, I think meal planning works really well, maybe because that just works for me. But if people have an idea, right, of what they like, sometimes it's easier to make bigger batches and have it handy. Because again, we're tired at the end of the day, and that drive-through is on the way home, right? It's cheap, it's easy, it's quick. I don't have to be in the kitchen. But if you already had that food ready in the freezer, if you had put it in the ice box, that morning, and it was already ready for your family, all you had to really do is just warm it up. The time that it takes you to warm it up may be not even 10 minutes, probably about the same amount of time you'd be waiting in line at the drive-through. And it'd be something that would be nutritious, right, and beneficial for you and for your family. And so that's why I like meal planning, but it does take some planning. Yeah. But even putting things in your, like, not bringing home sugars is a good first step, right? Because if you don't have it in your house, it's easy, easier to stop and sit with that urge and think, okay, do I really want this? Do I really need it? Right? Like, what emotions am I experiencing, versus like, oh no, I want popcorn, I want chips, I want that chocolate bar, and it's, right there in the pantry. Yeah. So when you don't have it and you don't bring it home, or when you run out of it and you don't replenish that stock, it's a lot easier to sit with that urge and be like, oh, because then you're thinking, okay, if I really still want that chocolate, do I have to get dressed and go to town, get in my car, walk to the end of the block? Is it really worth that?
Right. And most of the time,
it might. Yeah, and it might be, but you get to make that decision, right? So
yeah. So I think the take home is, like, it's not all or nothing.
No. Yeah.
Right? It's a progression.
Yes.
Just make 80% of the time, make good choices. That's it. And consistency is non-perfect action taken over and over. That's it.
Yes.
Like, you go eat a pizza.
It's
fine. 80% of the time, you're investing in your health and healing. It's fine. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then another question to ask yourself, I think, when you're facing those urges is like, do I want to emotionally feel good right now, or do I want to physically feel good? Because those are two different decisions. If I want to emotionally feel good, I'm going to indulge in this, but I know that it's subtracting from me physically feeling good. I can avoid this urge and not emotionally feel good, but physically feel good, and know that I can handle any emotion. It's just a chemical response in my body that's going to pass in a minute and a half. Fine.
That's true.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that there's a really good app. My husband has it. Let's see if I can get the people to see it. It's called Meal Lime.
I don't know that one.
and it's free, but there is a paid version. But it has a ton of different ideas that you can like start easy, healthy meals. And I'll tell you like how long to cook. You can make a grocery list from it.
Oh.
So, like, that's one way because a lot of I know I get in a rut and I'm like, I'm so sick of eating this. And so, when I get to that point of where I'm sick of eating it, I want to turn to the convenience foods, right? Like frozen pizza
Mm-hmm.
versus I'm tired of eating broccoli and chicken and rice. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that resource. Yeah, meal lime. I haven't explored that one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Anything else, friend?
I think that's it for today.
All right, people, sit with the urge. You can handle any emotion.
Yes.
You have chemical responses, and we're investing in your health. All right.